The Persian Gulf stretches across 550 nautical miles of some of the most strategically critical water on Earth. Through these waters flows nearly a third of the world's seaborne oil trade. Every day, tankers carrying crude oil from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE and Iraq navigate these narrow passages, passing through the Strait of Hormuz, a bottleneck just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. This geography has made the Gulf simultaneously one of the most important and most contested bodies of water in modern geopolitics. Nations have fought over it, bargained over it, and monitored it with obsessive intensity for decades. It became something else entirely, a proving ground for how a modern military responds when diplomacy collapses into seconds and decisions must be made under conditions of perfect uncertainty. The USS Stout was conducting a routine patrol that afternoon, operating as part of the Fifth Fleet's ongoing presence mission in the region. The Stout is a guided missile destroyer of the Arleigh Burke class, a ship type that has become the backbone of American naval power projection worldwide. Built in 1999, she had already logged 2.5 decades of operational service across multiple deployments. On this particular day, she carried the full weight of American naval capability, 96 Tomahawk cruise missiles loaded in her vertical launch system, an advanced phased array radar system capable of tracking targets across a 360-degree arc at ranges exceeding 100 nautical miles, and a crew of 340 highly trained sailors. By any measure, the USS Stout represented an instrument of overwhelming force projected into a region that Iran had long considered its own sphere of influence. But the strategic landscape had been shifting. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy had been particularly active throughout that winter. Starting in early January, provocations had escalated steadily through small fast attack boats. Vessels like the Baghammer-class speedboats operated by the Iranian Navy's surface combat elements began conducting experimental engagement patterns against merchant shipping. These weren't full-scale attacks, but rather probing operations designed to test American awareness, response times, and rules of engagement. Drone overflights became more frequent and pushed closer to U.S. positions with each iteration, almost as if the Iranians were systematically mapping the boundaries of American tolerance. This campaign of harassment served a clear strategic purpose. It was a way of communicating to Washington, without explicit statements, that American naval dominance in the Persian Gulf was no longer uncontested. Every close approach with a fast attack boat, every drone overflight, every aggressive maneuvering was a data point designed to accumulate into a larger message. Your supremacy here is no longer absolute, and we are prepared to challenge it in ways you may not anticipate. The decision to launch the missile attack came from somewhere inside the fortified compound in Bandar Abbas, where the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy maintains its maritime command center. The compound overlooks the shipping lanes and the naval anchorages where Iranian military vessels operate. The order wasn't a spontaneous reaction to a specific American provocation. It wasn't a defensive response to an imminent threat. Rather, it represented a calculated strategic decision made at the highest levels of Iranian military leadership. It was designed as a deliberate test of American resolve, a way to draw a line in the sand and observe whether America would cross it, and if so, how. The weapon they selected was the Noor missile, an Iranian-developed anti-ship cruise missile that had been in service since the early 2000s. The Noor represents a significant reverse engineering and modification effort based on the Chinese C-802 anti-ship missile platform. After more than 2 decades of continuous development and refinement, the Noor had evolved considerably from its original design. The variant fired that afternoon possessed several important capabilities. Its operational range extended to approximately 220 kilometers, making it capable of striking targets well beyond the immediate vicinity of Iranian coastal installations. It was designed to cruise at relatively low altitude, wave-top height, which made radar detection more challenging, particularly for older or less sophisticated air defense systems. The warhead was engineered to penetrate naval hull structures and detonate internally, maximizing damage to the ship's internal compartments rather than relying on external blast effects. The Noor was not a hypersonic weapon. It would not arrive at its target in the hypersonic speed envelope, above Mach 5, that makes interception extraordinarily difficult. It was not immune to contemporary air defense systems. In fact, naval analysts understood that a modern destroyer like the USS Stout possessed multiple layers of defensive capability specifically designed to counter missiles exactly like the Noor. But understanding something theoretically and dealing with it in practice when you're the captain of a warship are entirely different propositions. The crew of the USS Stout detected the incoming missile on their advanced radar suite at approximately 51 nautical miles. That distance translates to roughly 95 kilometers. At the missile's cruise speed of approximately 900 kilometers per hour, that gave the ship's defenders roughly 6 minutes before potential impact. In absolute terms, 6 minutes is a considerable amount of time. In the compressed time frame of naval combat, where events cascade at nearly incomprehensible speeds and decisions must be made with incomplete information, 6 minutes is barely enough time to execute the defensive procedures that your training has burned into your muscle memory. Commander David Harrison was the commanding officer of the USS Stout, a 22-year veteran of the Navy who had entered service in the early 2000s. Harrison had lived through the entire evolution of modern naval warfare. He served during the operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, where Navy vessels provided gunfire support and cruise missile strikes into continental targets. He conducted multiple deployments to the Arabian Gulf and had spent countless hours in classified briefings studying Iranian military tactics and capabilities. Over the previous 18 months, he became obsessed with understanding Iranian naval doctrine, how they thought, what they valued, what they feared, how they were likely to react under various scenarios. Harrison understood, in that moment when the radar warning came through, that this was a threshold crossing event. Iran had fired a military weapon at a US warship. The only remaining question was whether the Stout would survive the encounter. Everything that happened in the next few minutes would determine not just whether his ship stayed afloat, but what it would mean for the entire region's strategic balance. The Phalanx CWS, Close-In Weapon System, activated automatically. This system represents one of the most sophisticated automated defense mechanisms ever developed. It is a radar-guided, computer-controlled Gatling gun that fires depleted uranium rounds at a cyclic rate of 4,500 rounds per minute. The system is designed to operate independently, without requiring human authorization or direction. You load the parameters into the system during peacetime, and when a threat appears, the system makes its own targeting decisions and engages. In theory, this provides a faster response than could be achieved by human operators who need to receive information, process it, make a decision, and execute that decision. The Phalanx system acquired the Noor missile at approximately 45 nautical miles and initiated engagement. A stream of depleted uranium rounds, each traveling at approximately 3,500 feet per second, tore into the sky. The system maintained fire for roughly 18 seconds, expending approximately 1,350 rounds. The Noor missile disappeared from radar. But this is where things became complicated. A near miss from a Phalanx system can fragment a missile, destroy its structural integrity, and disable its guidance systems. But a near miss doesn't always result in detonation of the warhead itself. The warhead on the Noor is heavily armored and designed to withstand stress loads. The missile's fuel can continue to propel it even with catastrophic structural damage. The guidance systems may be destroyed, but the missile's momentum and the remaining fuel in its tanks can keep it flying, albeit on an uncontrolled trajectory. This is precisely what happened in this instance. The missile was damaged severely by the Phalanx rounds, its guidance systems were destroyed, and its structural integrity was compromised. But it remained airborne. It was going to impact something. The only questions were where and when. 340 meters. To provide context, that's approximately the length of the Empire State Building laid horizontally on its side. That's roughly the length of 4 football fields end to end. That was the distance the damaged Noor missile traveled before its weakened airframe finally gave way and the warhead detonated in the water off the starboard side of the USS Stout. The explosion was close enough that fragmentation from the blast, shrapnel from the warhead casing, pieces of the missile structure, cavitation bubbles collapsing in the water, riddled the destroyer's hull with impacts. One sailor, stationed in a crew's quarters on the port side of the ship, was struck by fragmentation and sustained serious but non-life-threatening wounds. He was immediately treated by the ship's medical team and would later receive a Purple Heart for his wounds in combat. The ship's superstructure, the mast, the sensor arrays, the exterior surfaces, showed significant impact damage from fragmentation. A section of the hull below the waterline was punctured, though not catastrophically. Alarms triggered throughout the ship. Damage control teams mobilized according to well-practiced procedures. The engineering team assessed the damage and confirmed the ship was still seaworthy and still combat capable. But here's what makes this moment genuinely important. In the 30 seconds after that detonation, before the missile's smoke and water vapor even cleared from the surface of the Gulf, Commander Harrison made a decision that would define not just the next phase of this particular confrontation, but would resonate across military decision-making for years afterward. Harrison contacted the battle group commander and requested authorization for immediate strike operations against Iranian coastal installations. Specifically, he requested authorization to employ the full combat power of his ship's weapons systems against all targets contained on what is known in military terminology as the COCOM list, the Central Command Target Package developed in peacetime for precisely this scenario. These are legitimate military targets: air defense batteries capable of launching missiles at American forces, radar installations that provide targeting data to Iranian weapons systems, command and control centers that coordinate Iranian military operations, ammunition depots that store the ordnance that would enable future attacks against American forces. The request went immediately up the chain of command to the battle group commander, who had tactical oversight of all naval assets in the operational area, to Fifth Fleet, the unified command authority for all U.S. Navy operations in the Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea, to CENTCOM, U.S. Central Command headquartered in Tampa, Florida, which coordinates all military operations across the entire Middle East theater. The entire command structure was already on heightened alert. They had been tracking the Iranian missile system that had just been employed and had tactical overhead intelligence assets, likely satellites or high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, positioned to monitor the Persian Gulf in real time. The request for authorization to strike reached the Pentagon. It went to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It reached the Office of the National Security Advisor to the President. In Washington, the situation was being assessed in real time. Lawyers were being consulted regarding the legality of the response under international law. Strategic advisors were considering the geopolitical implications. Intelligence analysts were assessing whether this represented the beginning of a broader Iranian campaign or a limited probing action. The authorization to strike came back 6 minutes and 44 seconds after the initial impact. The message was unambiguous: you are weapons free. Execute the strike package. 29 minutes had elapsed from the moment the Noor missile detonated off the starboard side of the USS Stout to the moment that authorization reached Commander Harrison's Combat Information Center. 29 minutes for an attack to be detected, assessed, escalated through the entire chain of command, evaluated at the highest levels of government, and responded to with authorization for counterstrike operations. That time frame reveals something profound about how modern military organizations actually function under pressure. Every person in that chain of command made a decision that contributed to the final outcome. The phalanx operator who maintained fire discipline, the damage control team that assessed the ship's condition and communicated it accurately, the captain who made the initial request for authorization, the battle group commander who escalated it appropriately, the commanders at 5th Fleet and CENTCOM who assessed the strategic context, the national security advisor who understood the implications. All of these individual decisions, made sequentially, culminated in the final authorization. The USS Stout's vertical launch system came alive. This is an automated weapon platform that operates on principles similar to the Phalanx, but at a strategic rather than tactical level. 16 Tomahawk cruise missiles occupied vertical tubes in the ship's hull, each one loaded with targeting data, each one oriented toward a specific objective on the Iranian coast. The fire control officer, seated before a workstation with access to the targeting database, initiated the launch sequence. All 16 missiles launched within 70 seconds of each other. They rose from their launch cells, solid rocket boosters igniting, flames streaming downward against the deck of the ship, the missiles climbing rapidly to cruise altitude as they gained forward momentum. They oriented themselves toward the Iranian coast and began their journey inland at a cruise speed of approximately 550 miles per hour, far too fast for most Iranian air defense systems to effectively track and engage. The cruise missiles carried different targeting parameters. 8 of the 16 were designated for Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy installations along the coast, naval bases, ammunition storage facilities, command centers where the decision to launch the Noor missile had originated. 3 missiles were targeted against an air defense radar facility near the town of Keshem. 2 were designated for an ammunition depot that supported Iranian naval operations. 3 additional missiles struck a command center believed to house senior IRGC Navy leadership. The entire strike package arrived on target within a window of approximately 45 minutes from launch. The accuracy was remarkable, minimal collateral damage reported, no strikes against civilian infrastructure. The Iranian government would later release photographs of the destroyed installations, which confirmed that the Americans had targeted precisely what they said they would target: military facilities that directly supported Iranian offensive capability. The casualty count was never officially released by the Pentagon, adhering to standard policy regarding classified military operations. However, Iranian state media reported approximately 47 military personnel confirmed killed and over 100 injured across the various targets. The infrastructure damage was extensive and visible in satellite imagery within hours. An Iranian official, speaking on condition of anonymity to international media, described the coast as bearing the scars of American aggression. The United States issued a carefully worded statement: the USS Stout was attacked by an Iranian missile. We responded proportionally to defend American forces and installations. We have no further ambitions in this conflict and stand ready to discuss de-escalation with the Iranian government through appropriate diplomatic channels. This is where the narrative becomes genuinely instructive, because what happened in the hours and days following the strikes was unexpected by many analysts who had predicted escalation. Iran did not launch a second wave of missiles. They issued harsh rhetorical responses, statements about defending national sovereignty, about American imperialism, about the need for a response. But no additional military action followed. The provocations from fast attack boats ceased. The drone overflights stopped. The escalation cycle, which could have spiraled into something substantially larger, simply stopped. Talks began through intermediaries within 72 hours. The United Arab Emirates, which maintained commercial relationships with both the United States and Iran, offered to host negotiations. Kuwait provided additional diplomatic facilitation. By the end of the following week, representatives from both nations were engaged in discussions about establishing protocols to prevent future incidents of this nature. What has changed the strategic calculus? The answer lies not in the weapons themselves, but in what the strike actually demonstrated about American decision-making capability and strategic intent. From the moment the Iranian missile was detected to the moment 16 Tomahawk missiles destroyed Iranian military installations took 29 minutes. The strikes were precise. The targeting was accurate. No civilian infrastructure was damaged. There was no escalation beyond what the incident precisely warranted. There was no emotional response dressed up as strategic action. Just professional, measured destruction of military capability. Iran's leadership could see clearly that attacking American forces in the Persian Gulf would result in immediate, measured, and professional retaliation. Not emotional, not excessive, not designed to humiliate or destroy the nation. Just a clear statement: if you attack us, we will respond against the military capability that enabled that attack. That clarity is precisely what makes deterrence function in the modern security environment. When an adversary knows exactly what will happen if they attack you, they can conduct rational cost-benefit analysis. They can ask themselves, what is the political gain from attacking this American warship? Is it worth the guaranteed destruction of my military installations? The answer in this case was clearly no. Commander Harrison's decision possessed another important dimension that deserves careful analysis. He didn't wait for perfect intelligence about where the next Iranian missiles might be coming from. He didn't conduct extensive targeting analysis or request additional surveillance data. He struck the legitimate military targets that directly supported the capability that had just been employed against his ship. The air defense systems, the command centers, the ammunition depots, the support infrastructure. This represents a form of tactical clarity that most naval commanders throughout history never achieve. Understanding the difference between retribution and strategy. Retribution is emotional and often excessive. It's about punishing an adversary for what they did. Strategy is measured and purposeful. It's about preventing them from doing it again. In the weeks and months after the incident, military historians and strategists analyzed what had actually transpired from multiple perspectives. Some questioned whether the Iranian leadership had genuinely expected the American response to be so rapid and so precise. Others argued from the opposite direction that the response had been too restrained, that a stronger show of force, perhaps strikes against additional Iranian facilities or a broader demonstration of capability, might have permanently prevented future provocations. Some analysts concluded that the response had been calibrated exactly correctly, meeting force with force, but not escalating beyond what the provocation precisely warranted. Academic papers were written about the incident. The Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, incorporated analysis of the USS Stout engagement into their curriculum for senior Navy officers. Strategic studies programs at universities across the country used the incident as a case study in escalation control and deterrence dynamics. The incident became, despite not being particularly large or complex, enormously instructive in how professional militaries actually handle crisis situations. The Noor missile that detonated 340 meters from the USS Stout became a case study in another important area: the limits of precision in modern naval warfare. The missile proved that Iranian anti-ship capabilities were real and posed genuine danger to American surface vessels. But the U.S. response demonstrated that America possessed countermeasures, that those countermeasures worked, and that the consequence of employing Iranian missiles against American forces would be swift and costly. The missile was dangerous, but it was not invulnerable, and the response to its employment was not hesitant. What's remarkable about this incident is how it illustrates what modern naval deterrence actually looks like when it functions properly. It's not about the biggest show of force. It's not about intimidation or massive demonstrations of firepower. It's about demonstrating that you understand the threat, you can respond immediately, and that response will be precisely calibrated to the level of provocation. From the moment a captain detects a missile launch to the moment counterstrikes destroy the capabilities that enabled that launch, accomplished within 30 minutes with no strategic ambiguity about intent, method, or consequence. The damage to the USS Stout was classified as substantial but reparable. Within 72 hours, the ship's engineering team had sealed the hull breach, restored full propulsion capability, and confirmed combat readiness. The ship sailed back to her base in the United Arab Emirates 2 days later, arriving to a hero's welcome from the international media, which had been following the incident obsessively. The one sailor who had been wounded in the fragmentation attack received a Purple Heart for his wounds and was medically evacuated to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany for specialized treatment. The incident didn't dominate international headlines for very long. In the constant churn of global news cycles, it was absorbed into the larger narrative of US-Iran tensions that had been simmering since the Islamic Revolution and had intensified dramatically following events and the years that followed. But for military professionals, commanders, strategists, naval officers, military thinkers, the incident remained eternally relevant. It was a masterclass in something rarely discussed in public discourse: how nations actually signal resolve to adversaries. That signaling doesn't happen through threats or grand rhetoric delivered in speeches. It happens through showing, with complete clarity, with undeniable evidence, that when you attack them, they understand exactly how they will respond, they accept responsibility for that response, and they will execute it. The 340-meter miss became, paradoxically, a direct hit on Iranian strategic calculus. It sent a message that Tehran's leadership understood with crystal clarity: American power in the Persian Gulf remains overwhelming. American response to attacks will be immediate and precise. The cost of further provocations will exceed any political benefit Iran might gain. That clarity alone prevented a second round of attacks that could have escalated into something substantially larger, something that could have disrupted global oil markets, destabilized the entire region, and resulted in casualty counts far exceeding what occurred in this incident. If you found value in understanding how military responses to attacks are actually coordinated, authorized, and executed in real time, how decisions flow through chains of command, how strategic thinking remains possible even in tactically compressed timeframes, how nations communicate resolve through action rather than words, this channel is dedicated to exploring exactly these kinds of incidents. Subscribe if you want to see the tactical and strategic details behind these operations that rarely get full public analysis. We dive deep into the decisions commanders make when they have minutes to respond to situations that could reshape international relations. The story of the USS Stout also raises a fascinating question worth serious consideration. What happens to deterrence in a world where decisions have to be made faster and faster? When a captain has 6 minutes from detection of a missile to its potential impact, how much strategic thinking can actually factor into the response? How much is pure training and automatic reaction? The answer is more nuanced than most people would expect. What separates a professional military from an amateur one is precisely the ability to maintain strategic perspective even when operating at tactical speeds. Modern naval officers train constantly to think about the larger implications of their actions, even in moments that seem to demand only tactical response. That distinction, between the immediate decision and the broader consequence, is what separates a captain who prevents a conflict from escalating into something larger from one who inadvertently triggers it. In the months following the incident, Iran did not attempt another significant anti-ship missile attack against U.S. forces in the Persian Gulf. They continued periodic provocations with fast attack boats and periodic drone overflights, but those operations were conducted at lower levels of intensity and with clear delineation from any weapons employment. They understood the lesson that the USS Stout had taught them. Ballistic and cruise missile attacks against American forces would be met with immediate, professional retaliation against legitimate military targets. That lesson was understood, internalized, and acted upon. No additional escalation followed. The deterrence established through the incident held firm. This is what the encounter was really about, ultimately. Not the missile or the interception or even the counterstrike itself. It was about two nations establishing, through action rather than words, where the boundaries actually existed in their relationship. Iran tested the boundary. The United States clarified it, unmistakably. Both sides understood what that clarity meant, and both adjusted their behavior accordingly. That's how deterrence functions when it works properly.